40 years ago, October 20th at 6:30 is about the time that we went down.
The story of Lynyrd Skynyrd has always carried a heavy weight of tragedy and mystery. Most people know the band for their southern rock anthems and distinctive sound, but beneath their public persona was a turbulent and often chaotic history, punctuated by the horrific plane crash in 1977 that claimed the lives of several band members. Among the unanswered questions surrounding that fateful day was a lingering uncertainty about the true cause of the crash and what really happened during the final minutes in the air. For decades, official reports blamed fuel exhaustion and pilot error, but a recently unearthed cache of recordings, flight data, and a deeply buried aviation investigation file has now revealed a previously unknown layer to the story, and what's emerged is truly shocking. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. For years, family members, surviving bandmates, and fans have speculated about inconsistencies in the crash narrative. Though the official National Transportation Safety Board report from 1978 declared that fuel mismanagement was the main culprit, many were uneasy with that conclusion. Survivors recalled odd mechanical sounds before the engines died, while others recounted unusual behavior by the flight crew just hours before takeoff. These fragments never formed a coherent alternative theory. Until now. What was long dismissed as anecdotal or grief-stricken distortion has suddenly found a spine of truth with the discovery of private maintenance logs, a hidden flight recorder duplicate, and the statements of an anonymous whistleblower who has finally come forward after decades of silence. At the heart of this mystery lies the Convair CV-240 aircraft that the band had chartered for their tour. It was no secret even at the time that the plane was aging and had seen better days. The band was reportedly aware of the plane's history of minor technical issues, but had opted to fly it anyway, largely due to budget constraints and a rushed schedule. What was not publicly known, and what has now come to light, is that the aircraft had been red flagged by a maintenance technician just days before the fateful flight. This technician had logged a serious fault in the fuel gauge system and strongly recommended the grounding of the plane until full diagnostics could be run. That report was never escalated beyond the private maintenance crew. The reason? An internal memo, now recovered, indicates that there was pressure from tour management to make the plane flight ready no matter what. The whistleblower, a former employee of the now defunct charter company, has revealed in a confidential deposition that the faulty fuel gauge system was known internally but actively covered up. According to the new evidence, company executives feared that canceling the high-profile tour contract with Lynyrd Skynyrd would financially cripple them. The risk was assessed, and the decision was made to proceed without disclosing the malfunction to the flight crew. Even more disturbing, maintenance records were allegedly altered to reflect routine maintenance rather than highlighting the serious nature of the fault. The implications of this revelation are staggering. It suggests that the crash was not just an unfortunate incident caused by pilot error and fuel mismanagement, but rather a consequence of calculated negligence and a cover-up at the corporate level. This changes everything about how the tragedy has been understood for almost 5 decades. It adds a chilling dimension to the narrative, that the band's fate may have been sealed not by chance or bad luck, but by a series of unethical decisions driven by money. Further analysis of the newly discovered flight recorder data has provided deeper insights into the plane's final moments. Contrary to earlier beliefs that the crew was unaware of the severity of the situation until minutes before the crash, the data indicates that both pilots were aware of erratic fuel readings well before engine failure. They apparently debated whether to divert to a closer airport, but without accurate fuel metrics, they made the fateful choice to continue on course. The newly available cockpit recordings include muffled conversations, growing frustration, and finally panic as both engines failed nearly simultaneously. Equally troubling is the information that has emerged about the pilot and co-pilot's qualifications. While both were technically certified, the whistleblower confirmed that internal personnel files, never previously reviewed by federal investigators, showed that the pilot had been reprimanded several times for procedural violations. On at least 2 prior occasions, he had been cited for ignoring safety checklists and cutting corners during pre-flight inspections. This detail never reached official inquiry channels, possibly because these files were locked away under confidential personnel review designations that investigators were not given access to. The cascade of negligence, misinformation, and suppression paints a grim portrait of an avoidable tragedy. It calls into question not only the ethics of the charter company involved, but also the thoroughness of the original investigation. If key pieces of evidence were withheld or intentionally obscured, then every conclusion drawn from that investigation becomes suspect. One can only wonder what justice might have looked like had this information surfaced decades earlier. Another bombshell detail concerns a strange mechanical part found at the crash site that had long puzzled investigators. Originally thought to be part of a dislodged air conditioning unit, this component has now been re-examined and identified as a makeshift bypass valve used in a temporary fix for a leaking fuel line. The maintenance log where this alteration was documented had been quietly removed from the aircraft's formal records. The use of non-standard parts in aviation is highly regulated, and the presence of this makeshift device without proper certification strongly suggests that unauthorized repairs were made to keep the plane in service despite ongoing fuel system issues. Moreover, interviews with crew members who had flown the aircraft in the weeks leading up to the crash show a pattern of warning signs. One crew chief recalled a fuel imbalance that had almost resulted in an emergency landing just a week prior. Another described vibrations and inconsistent fuel pressure, but said he was told to keep his mouth shut if he wanted to stay employed. These testimonies, now corroborated by physical evidence and technical documentation, form a mosaic of systemic failure, one that prioritized short-term profit over long-term safety. What makes this discovery even more tragic is the personal toll it represents. The loss of Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, Cassie Gaines, and others on that plane was a blow not just to Southern rock, but to American music history. Fans mourned the loss, and the surviving members carried the weight of that day in every performance that followed. To learn now that their friends and bandmates may have died not because of a random mechanical failure, but due to deliberate risk-taking and negligence, is nothing short of heartbreaking. There's also a psychological dimension to this revelation that should not be overlooked. Survivors of the crash, many of whom have dealt with lifelong trauma, had at least accepted the official version of events, that it was a tragic accident. To have that understanding ripped apart after decades is a seismic emotional shock. It reopens old wounds and replaces the cold acceptance of fate with the fury of betrayal. For the families of those who died, this new information brings no closure, only new anguish. As more documents continue to be analyzed, attention has turned toward the role of aviation oversight bodies at the time. Why didn't the Federal Aviation Administration detect the faulty reporting or investigate deeper into the charter company's safety protocols? Evidence now points to a pattern of lax oversight in the 1970s, particularly concerning small charter operators. Budget cuts and jurisdictional confusion often meant that inspections were infrequent and based largely on voluntary disclosures, a system ripe for abuse. The Lynyrd Skynyrd crash, when placed under the lens of these new findings, becomes emblematic of a much broader failure in aviation regulation during that era. It reveals how regulatory gaps and corporate pressure can intersect to create deadly consequences. Had even one link in this chain of failure been broken, had the faulty fuel gauge been fixed, had the pilots known about the true fuel levels, had the unauthorized repair been flagged, the crash could have been avoided, but none of that happened. The uncovering of this mystery also raises ethical questions about the responsibilities of companies that work behind the scenes in the entertainment industry. Bands and performers often rely on third-party vendors for transportation and logistics, trusting them with their lives. When those vendors prioritize financial considerations over basic safety, the consequences can be catastrophic. This event underscores the urgent need for transparency and accountability in every aspect of tour planning and execution. With the central mystery now unraveled and the haunting truth of negligence and cover-up laid bare, what lingers is a sense of unresolved reckoning. Beyond the technical explanations and the reconstructed timeline of the doomed flight, this revelation creates a powerful cultural and emotional upheaval that reshapes how Lynyrd Skynyrd is remembered. The impact of this discovery does not end with new headlines. It pushes deep into the collective memory of music history, fan culture, and the very spirit of Southern rock. It forces a complete re-examination of the mythology built around the band and the ideals they came to represent. Lynyrd Skynyrd was never just a band to its followers. They were a symbol of defiance, of raw musical honesty, and of an unpolished Americana that appealed to millions. Their sound, shaped by bluesy riffs, gritty vocals, and unfiltered storytelling, connected deeply with those who saw themselves reflected in the band's unvarnished authenticity. The crash that took key members was mourned not just as a loss of artists, but as the silencing of a voice that spoke to a generation. That collective grief, long cushioned by the belief in a tragic accident, now flares anew with the realization that it was preventable. The cultural significance of the crash has always loomed large, but this new context sharpens that significance to a piercing edge. Music historians, for decades, treated the Skynyrd crash as a morbid yet romanticized turning point, one of those events where greatness and tragedy intertwined. But with this revelation, that romanticism gives way to anger. The band did not go down heroically in the face of uncontrollable disaster. They were dragged into a death spiral orchestrated by greed, neglect, and systemic failures. This perspective drastically shifts how we view their legacy. More than a reassessment of their death, it invites a reconsideration of their life as a band, their decisions, their pressures, the industry dynamics they were caught in. Lynyrd Skynyrd was on the cusp of global stardom when the crash occurred. They were transitioning from rebellious regional icons to full-scale international rock legends. Their popularity was snowballing. They were playing larger venues, headlining bigger tours, and expanding their influence far beyond the southern United States. In that context, every logistical decision carried significant weight. Every tour stop, every chartered flight, every management directive. The revelation about the plane's unsafe condition, coupled with the knowledge that management was pressuring for continuous travel despite known risks, adds a disturbing layer to this meteoric rise. The band, while energetic and driven, was also being pulled in 1,000 directions by handlers, promoters, and contractual obligations. The machine of fame had little room for rest or caution. In this light, they were not simply victims of a crash, but of the machinery that profits from pushing artists to the brink. Delving deeper, one must consider the implications this has for the broader music industry of the 1970s. The era was defined by a blend of opulence and recklessness, a time when artists were expected to live fast, work constantly, and embody the excesses of rock and roll. Safety and sustainability were afterthoughts. Skynyrd's crash is no longer an isolated incident. It's now a potent case study in what happens when the pursuit of profit collides with the physical limits of human endurance and mechanical reliability. There's a haunting sense that many other bands and artists may have unknowingly flirted with similar dangers. Touring in those days was relentless. The logistics often involved cutting corners, using subpar equipment, and relying on cost-effective, not necessarily safe, transport solutions. This new insight into Skynyrd's final flight casts doubt on the safety records of dozens of similar operations. It exposes an undercurrent of risk that was present in the lives of many traveling musicians of the time, creating a shadow legacy of near misses and potential disasters narrowly avoided. The decision-makers who allowed a clearly compromised aircraft to remain in service made a choice that cost lives. These were not abstract failures, but tangible decisions. Documents signed, warnings ignored, concerns dismissed. That specificity is what makes this new understanding so disturbing. It's one thing to believe that tragedy struck without warning. It's another to realize it came after repeated flashing red lights were deliberately turned off. This shifts the burden of responsibility toward those whose names were never known to the fans. While the band was on stage pouring out emotion and energy, unseen forces behind the curtain were making decisions that determined their fate. The newfound evidence implicates not only aviation staff and mechanics, but also middle managers, booking agents, and corporate executives. They exist in a web of shared accountability that stretches far beyond the cockpit of that ill-fated plane. The implications also touch on the psychology of survival. The members of Lynyrd Skynyrd who lived through the crash carried trauma for the rest of their lives. Until now, their pain was rooted in the randomness of tragedy. But with the introduction of blame and human error at such a systemic level, the trauma is recontextualized. Survivors may now grapple with the rage of knowing that friends died needlessly, not because of fate, but because of apathy. This reframing of memory can be destabilizing, as it demands a new emotional reckoning with events thought to be fully processed. The fans, too, are affected on a psychological level. For those who idolized the band, the crash was a point of origin for their devotion, a moment that galvanized loyalty and spiritual connection to the music. Now, those same fans are faced with the uncomfortable truth that they were mourning a manipulated narrative. What was once mourned as a tragic accident must now be viewed as manslaughter, cloaked in corporate procedure. The betrayal runs deep. It alters the emotional bond between audience and artist. In revisiting the band's final hours with these revelations in mind, one is struck by the grim irony of the band members' last known behaviors. They were reportedly in good spirits before takeoff, despite having joked uneasily about the plane's reliability. Their casual gallows humor about the aircraft's quirks, until now interpreted as nervous but unfounded, takes on new gravity. It wasn't paranoia. It was intuition clashing with the false assurance of professionals who had actively concealed the truth. What's equally disturbing is how close the band came to canceling that flight. Some accounts suggest that a few members considered alternative transportation, but were persuaded to stay the course for logistical convenience. That narrow decision window, now viewed through the prism of suppressed information, represents a missed opportunity to avert catastrophe. It's no longer just a what if. It's a reminder of how lives hang in the balance when the full picture is hidden. In a broader context, the revelation challenges the glamorization of dying young in rock mythology. The crash had long contributed to a narrative arc in which artists become immortal through untimely death. But this narrative romanticizes suffering and, worse, justifies systemic neglect. The Skynyrd mystery's resolution disrupts this idea entirely. Their deaths were not tragic fate. They were avoidable. And that truth deconstructs the mythos that has enshrined so many lost artists in legend. It demands a more honest reckoning with the conditions under which these cultural icons lived and died. This discovery is already stirring movement among historians and cultural archivists to revise the official accounts of the crash in documentaries, museum exhibits, and music retrospectives. The factual corrections may seem small, lines in a script, dates on a display, but they carry a massive ethical weight. To honor those who died, the truth must be preserved, not sanitized. The distorted version of events served a purpose in the absence of facts, but now clinging to it only deepens the injustice. Journalists and researchers are also beginning to question how such significant details could have gone unnoticed or unpursued for so long. Was it merely the limitations of the technology and oversight of the era, or was there active obstruction? The possibility that records were buried, voices silenced, and media steered away from deeper inquiry reflects a broader issue of accountability in historical narrative construction. Who gets to write history? And what happens when the pen was held by those with something to lose? The aviation industry, too, must reckon with this. Though the 1970s are long past, the echoes of their failures remain relevant. Every time a charter plane is booked, every time a cost-saving measure is approved, the lesson of Lynyrd Skynyrd's flight should ring out as a cautionary siren. Systems are only as safe as the integrity of those who run them. This revelation may not lead to criminal charges. Most responsible parties are likely deceased or legally shielded, but it must lead to vigilance. It must lead to a commitment that no band, no tour crew, no human life will again be placed at such risk for the sake of convenience. Culturally, the release of this truth invites a reckoning with how we process celebrity tragedy. Fans often want clean narratives, stories that offer meaning and emotional closure. The messiness of real life, the bureaucratic failures, the hidden motives, the profit-driven deceptions disrupts those narratives. Yet it is precisely in that messiness where the humanity lies. Recognizing that Lynyrd Skynyrd was failed by a system makes them more than icons. It makes them people who were wronged. That shift from idol to victim, from legend to casualty is painful, but necessary. The ripple effects extend to the music itself. Songs once interpreted through a lens of triumph now feel weighted with new sorrow. Lyrics that seem to celebrate freedom and escape now echo with bitter irony. Fans may find themselves hearing the music differently, not with diminished affection, but with deeper awareness. There's a profound ache in listening to voices that sang of life's fragility, knowing how brutally that fragility was tested and ignored. Even those who were not fans of the band may feel the implications of this discovery. It is a universal reminder of the costs of institutional failure, of the people lost not because of war or natural disaster, but because a series of people simply didn't do what they should have. In the Skynyrd crash, there is a mirror held up to every industry, every bureaucracy, every moment when a human life hangs on a decision made in an office far removed from the consequences. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the Lynyrd Skynyrd mystery? What do you think happened? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.